everyone. Today I'm going to speak on the topic the subtle nexus of gender, mobility, space, and infrastructure. Now, let us try to understand what each of these words means and how these complex words are linked together. Kamla Basin, in her book Understanding Gender, stated each society slowly transforms a male or female into a man or woman, into masculine and feminine with different qualities, behavior pattern, roles, responsibilities, rights, and expectation. This line rightly signifies that we tend to blind ourselves to see the variability aspect of gender because we often superimpose it on sex, which is a natural component within us. In simpler words, we tend to overlook the fact that gender is a socio-culturally constructed identity, unlike sex, which is biologically determined. Let's take an example. Since our childhood, we have seen that the women of the household are cooking and serving meals for everyone on daily basis. But when we visit a hotel or a cafe, we will see that majority of the chefs and waiters are all men. So the question emerges that if sex and gender are naturally intertwined, then how a male has the ability to cook? Therefore, it can be said that societal norms have constructed our gender roles and identity. This process is called gendering, which not only directs and forces us to be masculine enough and feminine enough, but it also influences our day-to-day choice. Now, this process of gendering, which I'm referring to, is imbibed by the process of socialization. So, various societal institutions such as family, schools, workspace, government, etc., try to reinforce the idea of masculinity and femininity through different ways. But one of the examples can be a primary level textbooks, which use he pronoun more often than she. And the usage of she pronoun is also very stereotyped. The other example can be that since our childhood, we are told that men don't cry or boys don't cry, or if you are a girl, you need to be more caring and empathetic. So these processes not only defines our gender roles, but also our behavioral pattern. And the outcome of this process is just one, that is maintaining of the status quo of a patriarchal society. This leads us to my third word, that is space. Now, the process of gendering is not only limited to individuals, but it is also done to spaces. For example, that some spaces are designated for men and some spaces are designated for women. And this designation is done by socio-cultural setup. Now, the basic foundation of this categorization can be the public and the private space. So, when we say public space, it is a space of politics, power, and production, and it is largely considered a space of men. But when we refer to a private space, it is linked with reproductive activities and domestic work, which is largely considered as a women's space. Now, let us go back to the previous example. Working in a hotel or being employed in a hotel is falling in the public space. The idea of employment is attached to it, which is why we will be able to see more men there. But when the same work is being done in a private space, which is traditionally seen as a women's space, you will notice that the work done in the private space is not recognized as labor by the society. So this public-private division is one of the major reasons because of which we do not see a lot of women in the workforce as compared to men. Now, if you try to observe at a micro level, even then we can figure out gendered spaces inside our houses, such as kitchen, or that one chair of the center chair of the dining table, or the television area in the evening. Now, coming to mobility. In simple language, mobility means the ability to move freely and easily. Now, the underlying notion of mobility comes on the surface the moment you link gender and space together. That is, when gender stratification of physical spaces and the nature of work is sustained in and by the society, then it leads to defining of space of access for gender. For example, the household chorus includes grocery shopping and vegetable shopping, despite the fact that grocery stores and vegetable mandis are located in public space. This space grants access to women as compared to the leisure spaces such as cinema, sports stadiums, or cafes, etc., which restricts the access of women to some extent. which is why you will see that there are more men in these spaces than women. So, the other aspect of mobility is that it is not just limited to space and gender roles, but it is heavily influenced by the patriarchal idea of honor and subordination. That is, like how many women have to ask for permission from their husband, brothers, or fathers before going out of the house? Or how many women are allowed to go out at night or evening or after a particular time? Or even if they are allowed, they are always accompanied by someone, and that someone is always a male member of the household. Now, all these practices construct and restrict gender mobility. Now, you will be thinking that why am I talking about all of these things? I think these small things influence our life to a greater extent, and we have deeply internalized these things that we do not even question when it happens to us or when we unknowingly feel obliged to follow these norms. Although, whatever I stated above are more complex phenomena and their interlinkage is more complex, which requires more in depth discussions. But let's move aside from that. I still sometimes feel that traveling with a male friend, brother, and father is much more safer than traveling alone. And I think a lot of us still feel that. So I believe that apart from being conditioned to think like that, because of the reasons I denoted previously, it is a lot to do with how we address these issues at a personal and a societal level. So at personal level, it is a journey to achieve a sense of consciousness at our own pace, where we are able to observe, where we are able to question, we are able to exercise our own choice without any obligation restriction. This is a very self-paced journey which each one of us undertakes, but will eventually do it. But let's come to a societal level. So, apart from awareness generation, I believe the issues of gender, mobility, space can be dealt is through creating enabling infrastructure at a macro level. This leads to my last word, that is infrastructures. Now, historically, cities were built by men for men, especially for heterosexual, able-bodied, cisgender men. Now, this gender blindness in city planning leads to further exclusion of women and marginalized group from by restricting their mobility access to public spaces. Now, this does not only affect their access to public spaces, but also to public facilities and services, their access to education, health, employment, everything. So, when we talk about enabling infrastructure, we are talking about making sure that these spaces, these services are much more accessible to all of us rather than just one set group of people. And it allows us to contribute our bit also by being a part of that space. Now, studies have traced that the mobility pattern of men are largely associated with point-to-point destination to workspace or leisure spaces at peak hours, whereas women mobility pattern is categorized by multiple destinations such as crèche, workplace, household, etc., household shopping, etc. And along with this travel pattern, they have to travel with dependents also, that is children and elderly population. They undertake shorter but more frequent trips distributed over peak and off-peak hours. Now, if you see that these travel pattern which I just which study stated does make sense, and if we observe it more closely, we will find that these travel patterns are largely governed and built based on the assigned gender roles to us, which is done by the society. So it is imperative for us to trace these travel patterns to make sure that enabling infrastructures are there. So therefore, there is a need to create cluster connectivity of these small stops to accommodate gender needs. So when we are talking about creating enabling infrastructure, we are talking about accommodating gender needs in the infrastructure. The second aspect which affects when it comes to infrastructure is the distribution of asset based on gender structure, which is visible in 2011 data on travel to place of work, which revealed that around 2 out of 3 female workers in urban areas commute for work, in which higher proportion of women, that is 72%, compared to men, that is 61%, use walk, cycle, and public transport to commute. This highlights the lack of access of women to private vehicles, making them more dependent on public transport. So, this is another aspect when we come to enabling infrastructure. Now, the third aspect which restricts mobility to public space is that some spaces are not considered safe due to the fear of sexual harassment and molestation. Now, studies have shown that how dark, isolated, high, uneven, unshaded public spaces make women and other marginalized groups feel unsafe. If we look at our own experiences, we will find that we will feel much more safer if we are walking down a well lit crowded street rather than a dark isolated street. We will feel more welcoming in community parks filled with children, elderly, which are not located in isolated areas. Even the segregated metro coaches makes us feel safer to commute. So all these small things are not actually that small, but are very important, because if they are incorporated in the system, they are enabling our mobility to a greater extent, allowing us to participate more. I think the other aspect is that public spaces will become more safer if women are employed in workforce. If all the enabling infrastructure is created, it will increase women employment also. And that will also reinforce to make sure that the spaces are safer and more accessible to women. Because when we will see female conductors, female cab drivers, female officers all around us, our city will not only feel more safe, but also inclusive and diverse. I would like to end by stating what is written in the book Why Loiters. It underlines that when society wants to keep women safe, it never chooses to make public spaces safer. Instead, it tries to limit her right to this space by reinforcing women's fear and normalizing their limited access to public space. I want all of you to ponder upon this statement and think, because I feel this is the time to question the societal construct, to demand our right to public space, our right to enabling infrastructure. Thank you.